afternoon, and welcome to our International ESG webinar, a collaboration between Cherry Bekaert and ESG Evolution, to bring you in-depth knowledge about the evolving landscape in sustainability-related reporting requirements in Germany and United States. Thank you for spending part of your morning or afternoon with us today. I'm Gabriella Payne, ESG consultant with Cherry Bekaert. I work with clients on ESG engagements in carbon accounting and helping clients identify risks and opportunities to enhance long-term value and sustainability strategies. I'm FSA credentialed and have obtained the CFA Institute certificate in ESG investing. I joined Cherry Bekaert from Fitch Ratings, where I spent over 15 years in public finance, assigning municipal bond ratings and ESG scores to U.S. debt securities. We have a packed agenda, but certainly will carve some time for Q&A before we close out. Please send us questions on the chat, and we will do our best to respond before the end of the webinar. And we're also going to encourage you to connect and follow up directly with our presenters. Our speakers today are Joe Hayner and Christian Reed. Joe Hayner is a partner at Cherry Bekaert. He leads the accounting advisory practice and spearheads the Carbon Accounting and Reporting Solutions national offering. Joe is also involved in the industrial manufacturing leadership team with a focus on automotive and mobility and marine sectors. Joe has diverse expertise in consultancy and advisory services to high-growth public and private technology companies. Joe specializes in design and implementation of global service solutions across industries, including redesign of operating models, providing strategic business planning to drive growth. Joe served as the CFO of Andre, a marine transportation and logistics company. He also spent 16 years serving a diverse mix of industries in North America and Europe while in public accounting at EY and Baker Tilly. When Joe is not designing business strategies to improve your businesses, Joe is mapping out the gnarliest ski lines on the slopes along his travels. With OMAX ESG Evolution, we have Christian Reed, who is the Vice President of Technology, Advisory, and Sustainability. Christian is a seasoned professional, specializing in guiding C-level executives on implementing technology-driven strategies in finance, supply chain, and sustainability. With expertise spanning transportation and logistics, energy, infrastructure, and manufacturing, he's delivered impactful results for clients worldwide, from medium-sized enterprises to global corporations. With a background at Deloitte Consulting, KPMG Consulting, and as a senior director at Bombardier Transportation, Christian brings a blend of analytical depth and practical insights to his work. He holds an MBA and an engineering degree from the Technical University of Berlin, focusing on information systems, financial management, and environmental resource economics. With no further ado, Joe, take it away.
Thank you, Gabriella. Appreciate the introduction, and good to see you, Christian. It's going to be a great event today. The agenda, packed agenda for today. Really want to keep it as tight as possible and focusing in on the areas which are we feel most important for German Mittelstand in this presentation, and really leaving a couple minutes in the end for Q&A. And please feel free to reach out to us if we couldn't address your question or something else is popping up in your agenda. You have our contact information. We would love to be a resource for you guys. Agenda, what do we have? We're going to talk a little bit about stakeholders, so kind of who is part of the mix of ESG or sustainability reporting, specifically for middle market companies. As you guys probably see every day, it seems like there's a new regulation coming out and being published. So I want to try to give you guys an overview of the evolving framework and the area which I at least built out as of today and what's on the horizon. Christian is going to talk really with a focus on European Union and the current main compliance requirements in Europe for German companies. We're going to touch on the GHG protocol, which you will see is kind of of importance in Europe, but also with new regulations, specifically in California. There's also the GHG protocol used for one of the laws passed end of last year. And then I'm going to focus on, towards the end, the U.S. carbon reporting, specifically the California climate and corporate data accountability law. Quite a bit of a name for that regulation, but it basically mandates certain companies to provide disclosures around their climate and carbon footprint and strategy by the end of 2026, early 2025, and then touch briefly on SEC climate disclosure rules. Not so much because we believe there are a lot of public companies attending today. It's more so thinking about a lot of our middle market clients and customers they serve. They have clients who are listed in specifically in the U.S., and we just want to provide an understanding what these SEC listed companies have to deal with, and then they, going to come back to their suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and going to ask for information to be able to comply with the disclosure requirements. On the next slide, we have a quick overview about our firm, J. Beckert. So it's a national firm. We have about $600 million in revenue. So the whole U.S. I personally work with quite a bit of international clients, specifically from Germany or from Europe, with sizable operations in the U.S. About 2,000 people, and really fast growing, kind of building out our specialty practices, which the sustainability reporting and the carbon compliance is really one of these fast growing practices. With that being said, handing it over to Christian, who's going to give us an overview of his firm, and then kind of start diving into the regulation from the European side.
Thanks, Gabriela. Thanks, Joe, for introducing me. Just a brief word on who is ESG Evolution. So we are 100% parent, or 100% subsidiary of our parent, Almax. It's a European digital strategy consultancy that's dealing with private equity firms and mid-sized companies in Europe, but also beyond on the transaction advisory strategy execution side. And we as ESG Evolution, we have the idea of building ESG leaders. So we specialize in sustainable value creation with data-driven strategies and hands-on implementation support, also on those 3 pillars: transaction advisory, strategy execution, dealing with ESG due diligence, ESG workshops, double materiality analysis, ESG strategy, and so on. So it's a way of approaching this topic from a really digital perspective, data perspective, but also with a compliance background that you need to really drive ESG and ESG transformation and value creation going forward. Next slide, please. So when we think about ESG, so there's various challenges for SMEs, and there's a lot of stakeholder questions that are popping up. It's from the business partners like customers and suppliers. So customers want to see if we as a company, if you as a company, meet supply chain needs. Suppliers want to know if the product is still in demand going forward. The workforce perspective is important. So that do employees still identify with the company when it comes to sustainability and the future of the company and the value they convey. It's talents perspective. So is your company secure and attractive employee long term? It's investors. So they want to understand, is it worth investing in this company, your company long term? On the banks, do they achieve the sustainable finance goals by providing you loans? It's of course public, NGOs, media. Do you meet the environmental standards with respect also to human rights and the legislator, EU, for example, but also beyond that? So to understand to what extent are your business activities sustainable and do you make it transparent? But at the end of the day, it's also you want to have long-term success as a company, and that picture makes it basically clear that ESG is way more than compliance. It's a transformative strategic topic for you as German Mittelstand, but also as global players to really find the proper answers to ESG, to your company, to your value creation for your customers and for all your stakeholders. And this is very important to understand when we talk about ESG, that compliance aspect is one, and to make then something value creating out of compliance, that is actually a challenge for the companies to also create then value going forward. Next slide, please. So when we look into the framework, so there's very a large set of regulations. It's EU regulations with the CSRD, what's basically the key topic from a US perspective today. It's a really large expansion of the scope of comparable reports like NFRD. It's the EU taxonomy, so it's in place since 2021 where the EU wants to drive, of course, investments in Europe as part of the EU Green Deal. It's the SFDRs, the disclosure requirements for financial markets and participants, and it's still in discussion, but corporate sustainability due diligence directive. Also, this is a large set of EU regulations that's currently wobbling around. On the US side, I mean, that's something what, of course, Joe will give you deep insights later on. It's on the German market. There's also some specific regulations like Lieferkettenschutzgesetz, so it's more or less the sustainable or corporate sustainability due diligence directive, and for supply chains. It's the German corporate governance code. So you see there's a lot of things already going on in Germany itself. There's voluntary reporting standards beyond that. So ISSB and GRI, SASB, TCFD. So a lot of various reporting standards, and also the IASB has a perspective on ESG. So what we see is that there's a lot of regulations in the market where, of course, you as a business holder feel a bit overwhelmed, and where there's some need to sort this out, to see what is really the driving forces here. And we today want, of course, focus here on the EU side with CSRD, but also on the US side with SEC and California mandates. But what we can already see that, and also that's discussions, what we see also when we talk about compliance and sustainability frameworks in other jurisdictions, that the CSRD framework is very powerful. It's the first complete framework for mandatory sustainable reporting. And there's something going on right now, of course, on a global scale, that CSRD is maybe also on a path for harmonization other sustainability standards, because CSRD is already affecting today and going forward many entities outside of EU anyway. We will come to that in a few minutes. So that's why CSRD seems to be something of a blueprint, maybe even for other jurisdictions. But yeah, let's maybe put the focus now on, as I said, CSRD and SEC and California mandates. And yeah, let's go to the next slide, please. So when we see the overall picture of what's happening in the EU, of course, there's the UN Sustainable Development Agenda that's already 20 years old, with the Paris Climate Accord 8 years ago already. The EU Green Deal as the force to drive investments. So there's a lot of regulations and a lot of initiatives in the EU to drive sustainability in the European market. And there's two very much frameworks that are, or three basically frameworks that are really powerful here. The CSRD as the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. As I said, it's basically the regulation on how to do proper and mandatory sustainability report. The starting point of all this is the double materiality analysis. It's all well defined within the standards, how it's going to be done and how and why. And based on that, of course, there's then standards for reporting. So what kind of data is to be reported? The standard for this is ESRS. And all various interested parties in those kind of reports take those data points. And of course, also the financial market participants need this data from their portfolio companies to create then also proper information for their own products, what they sell, financial products, if it's dark green products or light green products. So they also need this specific sustainability information from their portfolio companies, and that is then reported over into the public. So it means there's three pillars of sustainability related reporting in the EU. They all are connected together, and this is a very powerful instrument for the EU to drive investments, to create transparency, because in the past a lot of reports were not comparable with each other. There was much of concern, of course, and with that framework in place, what is currently what is already in the EU right, so it's law. It's not a standard in terms of recommendation. It's in the EU, it's law. It will have to be taken into national laws by the middle of this year. So it will be part of the national legislation of each EU member, and all the companies have to adhere to those standards. At the long term, it will create transparency. It will create a lot of information, but for you, it's also a lot of work and effort to get this information properly compiled, and that is the challenging piece that most Mittelstand businesses, for example, in Germany, now face when it comes to sustainability. As I said, that's the focus of today. Let's maybe go to the next slide. So when we see who needs to comply with CSRD, because when I talk about German Mittelstand, I mean it's a lot of companies, and in Europe we're talking about roughly 50,000 companies in Europe who need to comply with CSRD. It's basically 4 groups of companies. It's of course all companies with security listed on an EU regulated market, and that is, it doesn't matter if it's an EU or non-EU entity, as long as it's listed on EU regulated market, it needs to comply with CSRD. Exceptions only for micro entities. So micro means less than 10 employees and less than $1 million or $500,000 of net turnover, so really micro companies. But all the other companies that are listed need to comply with CSRD in the next years. So even this year already, large companies with over 500 employees have to report as per ESRS. Large companies that are not NFRD entities need to do this as of next year into 2026 for 2025. And then there's also small, medium-sized enterprises with more than 10 employees, net turnover of roughly €1 million, so really small ones already. And that, of course, has to comply in at least two consecutive financial years. So, and what we see here is there's already something going on. The next 2, 3, 4 years, there will be a lot of impact for those listed companies, but also second point for non-listed EU companies. And also here, it doesn't matter if it's a US headquarter-based company, as long as the EU subsidiary is large and non-listed. So large again, more than 250 employees, more than 50 million of revenue, or more than 250 million of total assets. So this is the criteria, and then you have to be compliant to CSRD already. The same applies to large groups. So large groups in terms of financial consolidation area. So even if it's a group of entities, as long as they together as a financial consolidation area form the same kind of criteria, meet this criteria, then they also have to report as per CSRD. And this also applies, for example, for EU holdings of non-EU parents and also EU intermediates. So it affects really a lot of companies. And last but not least, even if companies with non-EU parents or groups with non-EU parents, like in US headquarter, that has significant activity in the EU, that is defined as if more than 150 million revenue in the EU, and at least one large branch that is already CSRD compliant, or a branch with more than 40 million euro of revenue, then this entire group has to report as per CSRD. And there's various reporting options, as you see on the right side. The listed companies always have to do their own standalone reporting, so there's no way that they can call an exception. So they have to do this on their own. But the large non-listed and large groups, they can either do it on a consolidated way, so the parent entity issues this on behalf of the entire group, or even until 2030, it's called artificial consolidation. That means that the largest entity in this kind of group reports then on behalf of all the other subsidiaries, although if they don't belong to a financial consolidation area. But this only applies until 2030. And that means in the consolidated way, and that is maybe one of the challenges already, because there's the standard says, well, either you do it as per ESRS or by something that is by the European Commission accepted equivalent. Yeah. So, for example, if you're non-EU parent, like a US company, wants to provide a consolidated financial sustainability report for all the large EU subsidiaries, for example, they can do this, but they have to do this as per ESRS or by something that European Commission accepts equivalent, and that is not yet defined what is equivalent. And that's why it's so much important to understand and to see where the market develops and also where the regulations develops in each jurisdiction. For example, also in the US, this is maybe then considered equivalent for ESRS. And yeah, the point 4, of course, that has to be a consolidated report at the level of non-EU parent, but also here to what standard, actually ESRS or by something what is considered equivalent. So as you see here, it's a broad scope. The question is, how do we come from CSRD to a sustainability report? It's very much important to understand who are the key roles here. So it is not an exercise that can be done by the sustainability management only. They have to work together with risk management and with accounting. So it's a really it's a triple role system here, because they all have a various focus. The sustainability part more on the impact materiality, the risk management more on the risk and opportunities, and the accounting, for example, on the financial materiality. So it's very much recommended that those three roles in the company work together. And then the challenge, of course, is then the entire topic of the materiality analysis. So because the standard is very broad, as you see here, it's on environment, social governance, it's very much aspects that could be covered, climate change, pollution, etc. But all this is subject to materiality analysis through stakeholder engagement. So it means you have to conduct and engage with external and internal stakeholders through a proper engagement to identify then the materiality areas that are relevant for you as a company to report on ESG. And out of this, you derive then the KPIs, the metrics that are needed to report in those various areas. And around this, then you need a strategy. You need to know how to address those impacts, risks, and opportunities. You need to have the proper measures. How do you actually measure the data? What's the governance model around this? What is the program to address this? So you see, the report is very powerful. It's not just KPIs. It's really a framework around this, how you as a company address this going forward, because it has to be a part of the integrated management report together with the financial report, and is also part of the auditor. So it's need to be audited. So the financial auditor will also need to audit the sustainability report in the future, and that's why it's very much on the same level. In the next couple of years, it will become on the very same level, and will need the same diligence of creating those numbers and reports. Next, yeah. So there are some guiding principles given in the standard itself. As I said, the principle of double materiality, of course. So that is clear. You need there's two perspectives. One is the impact of your company to the humans and to the environment, and on the other hand, also the impact of environment and humans to your company from a risk and opportunity perspective. If one or the other applies, then of course it's already material. That is the biggest change and compared to other sustainability reports in the past. And also very much important to have an ongoing sustainability due diligence practice. So ESS does not impose this, but recommends that you do this on a very constant basis. It's also important to think about time series. So not only what is short and mid-term is relevant, but also what is long-term. Maybe your company, your business is in challenge in the next 15, 20 years because of climate change or because of any other ESG-related topic. Then you have to consider this already and assess and engage this as of today. What does it mean today for your business? And of course, to create all the information transparent, to also provide how you calculate this and to make it comparable. The ESRS 2, also on one of the basic standards, provides then the guidance, what is to be reported, like the governance. You need to define in the report itself already how the entire management and supervisory bodies deal with sustainability. How is that integrated in your internal control system? How is the entire performance incentivized in the company? How is actually sustainability made part of the management board already? Strategy-wise, how does sustainability affect strategy, business model, value chain? What is the interests and views of various stakeholders? What is the strategic answer to material impacts, risks, and opportunities? So that needs to be part of the sustainability report already. And of course, the IROs, the impact, risk, and opportunity itself. How did you identify them? How do you assess material impacts? What are the disclosure requirements? So there's a lot of disclosure requirements in ESRS for the material topics. Question is then, of course, what is material? And then identifying the disclosure requirements related to that. And the metrics and targets itself, so very detailed metrics, and how to track, of course, also the effectiveness and policies and actions through the targets. So this is basically the standard two frameworks, ESR 1 and 2, that always has to be considered as part of the reporting itself, and the rest is then as subject to materiality analysis. Next page. So what is the materiality scope? So in Europe and as part of CSRD, it's way more than environmental. So it's also social and governance. So you see all these various areas here that are defined by the ESRS itself. That means when a materiality assessment is done, you basically have to assess your value chain against those material areas and see, is there impacts, risks, opportunities related from an inside out, outside in perspective with respect to those various topics here. And the challenge, of course, is that it's a very cumbersome process. So it's not something that you do in a small workshop. You need to engage with stakeholders, you need to identify the stakeholders' opinion and perspective on various aspects here. That means talking to suppliers, customers, banks, investors, communities. If you have a production facility that is part of a larger community, it maybe makes sense to also talk to a mayor or to a municipality itself. So it means there is no well-defined and clearly given approach and standard in ESRS who you have talked to. So you need to make sure that you engage with stakeholders and that your entire materiality analysis is assessed and if all the stakeholder perspectives that are relevant as part of your value chain are considered. And when it comes to energy, that's maybe the point before I want then to hand over to Joe, but let's talk about, next slide, please. When it comes to energy, the greenhouse gas protocol is also for CSRD and ESRS the gold standard. That means scope 1, 2, 3 emissions are to be assessed and to be measured. Scope 1, of course, the emissions that directly are created as part of your own operations, own company facilities, company vehicles. And scope 2 is then as part of the purchased electricity, for example, steam, heating, cooling for your own use. So that is scope 1 and 2 is something what can be rather, I would say, rather easy compared to scope 3 measured. But scope 3 is then the big topic of upstream activities, downstream activities. So all the various emissions that are created and are created basically in your supply chain. It could be employee commuting, business travel, transportation from suppliers, could be processed of sold products. It could be also the end of life treatment of sold products, leased assets. So a lot of various aspects of emissions, and the greenhouse gas protocol provides here clear emissions counting and calculation standard. And ESRS also refers to greenhouse gas protocol when it comes to calculation of scope 1, 2, and 3. And this is for a lot of companies also then a part of the metrics and for the calculation, very much effort to do this, but this is something what is then the only way for you as a company also to identify the proper as-is values and to find then targets how to improve going forward. But as Joe earlier said already, the greenhouse gas protocol is also relevant for US, and maybe that's now the point to hand over to Joe.
Thank you, Christian. And for the US, we really have seen quite some development in 2023. So before 2023, in the US, there were some noise around really carbon reporting or sustainability requirements, but not really any mandate or legislation. And then towards the end of 2023, California basically broke the mold in coming out with their own legislation, which I'm going to dive into a little bit in my part of the presentation. But from a timeline, what you can see today, you have the kind of California mandate, and think about California being, on a global perspective, could be considered one of the largest economies in the world. So there's a significant economic impact, and most all of my clients have some business activities in California. If they might not be incorporated there, but they might have customers there. Then the SEC was toying around with a rule for 2 or 3 years now, and really launched a disclosure draft last year, and then finally came out with the regulation in March, so really fresh, which is being the SEC really focused on financial disclosures and comes along with some requirements about these financial disclosures being part of the financial statements and therefore also being part of audit requirements. Now, the SEC regulation is in litigation right now, so there's a pause on the execution. What we don't know is if that's going to change anything on the timeline, even if it's being litigated and it's being decided in favor of the SEC. The timeline might not change, so we encourage our clients to at least, if they are directly impacted, meaning being a public company, to look at least do an impact assessment. Okay, how long it's going to take to get that information for the disclosure, so you understand how much time you need. And then for our clients who have who are suppliers to listed companies in the U.S., we also ask them to basically see if they can find or get some information from their listed customers to see if they still gonna start investigating the SEC related disclosures. And then with them doing that, coming back to our clients, middle market clients who are not public but other suppliers. And as you saw with the Christian presentation, there's a lot which specifically around the greenhouse gas requirements, where you have to go to your suppliers, and that being a lot of my middle market clients, our middle market clients. In addition, the Biden administration, they put out last year, actually in spring last year, a timeline for the U.S. government to go to net zero, and the U.S. government being a big buyer actually of goods and services in the U.S. from the private economy. And so they are basically already mandating some specific requirements from organizations who want to deal with the federal government. So you need to kind of be prepared for that. If you want to be included or have a chance to win certain contracts in the future, you want to with the U.S. government, you want to be you have to be able to provide the information they're asking around your sustainability strategy. The biggest impact, I have to say, we see for our clients is really around big retail or our German customers or clients here in the U.S. who serve German companies or European-based companies. So I have a couple of clients in the automotive industry. They serve tier one automotive suppliers, or they serve OEMs, which have that, as we learned from Christian, a requirement already in the EU. So to be able to get that information ready in the EU, they basically need to get the information from their subsidiaries in the US. So they basically get really pulled into this through serving these customers in the US who have the reporting requirement in Europe. And then secondly, if they engage with a big retail like Walmart, like Amazon, like Target, like some other players, they kind of leading the charge in having already reports out there, or they are starting kind of building it out based on now using the SEC regulation as a blueprint of what's going to be required. And then they come to our customers and clients and asking them, hey, we need this 200-page questionnaire completed from you if you want to continue selling your product in a Walmart or in a Target or one of the big retailers. So that's from all these activities out there. What we see as a direct impact, what we see the most is really that that customer-driven questionnaire or request. Christian alluded to this. We also see sustainability as a strategic issue or strategic challenge. There's a strong compliance piece to that, which frankly, a lot of middle market or Mittelstand clients we have, they really ask me, okay, we want to be compliant, we want to be a good corporate citizen. We don't want to necessarily be a leader in that space or do more than what we need to do. So there's that there's their compliance focus. However, when we look at these and discuss it with our clients, we also think through the strategic opportunity. So if you have to work for the compliance and you have to develop a net zero strategy, would it not make sense to think also about what value can you get out of that or generate for your organization? And towards the end, we're going to touch on tax credits and incentives a little bit. Now you're wondering, okay, why are we talking about taxes now? It's really a good value proposition to pair your net zero strategy and your activities around how do I reduce my carbon footprint with all these tax credits and incentives. And I know there's a lot of noise and a lot of discussion around the IRA, specifically in Germany, and how does this work and what can this offer my company, my German company being in the U.S. There's quite a bit of tax credits and incentives which you would qualify. So there's a savings component to the whole compliance discussion and strategy. If we go to the next slide, I want to focus on a couple of things. So going to talk about California disclosure. Then we're going to talk about the SEC, just to give you guys a sense about what specifically the timelines your probably customers have to deal with, and then quick summary in the end of the regulation, and maybe kind of pointing out where there might be some alignment with regulation you have in the European Union. So from the California side, it's called the California Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act, and what it means is basically that companies, there are two laws, and in a nutshell, if your company has a global revenue more than $500 million and has business activity in California, then there is a reporting mandate for you in California. And if you think about this, it's like it's global revenue. So it's not, you can have $1 million revenue in your subsidiary in California, but your global organization is 500+ million. Then there's a requirement you have to deal with in California for your operation. So at the minimum, what we talk with clients about is really doing an assessment. Okay, do you qualify, or are you impacted by the legislation? And if yes, what's the roadmap, or what do you have to provide, and in what time frame, so you're ready for compliance? In California, basically said they would fine every organization who is not filing on time and correctly, or not filing at all, $500,000 per year you're not filing. So it's not a small amount which is being contemplated as a fine. If we go on to the next slide, which has a pretty good summary. So like I said, there are two regulations, two bills which are in law now. And you probably have seen or remember from Christian's presentation, where you had the different columns with the different frameworks. You can see that there's no new framework being introduced. It's basically frameworks you heard about a little bit earlier. So one is really the GHG, meaning the greenhouse gas protocol, as a framework for SB 253, which covers scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. It's applicable for companies with $1 billion in global revenue, and in that case, you have to basically provide a scope 1 and 2 reporting beginning of 1/1/25. So in 8-9 months from now, and then scope 3 1/1/26. From Christian's chart, you probably saw that scope 1 and scope 2 you might be able to get your hands around okay, or it's going to be not as intense as scope 3, where you really have to go deep in your supply chain. And for a lot of our manufacturing clients, if they have manufacturing around the globe and source out of China or some other countries, it's going to be challenging to get the information to be able to get it into the scope 3 reporting. So it's going to take some time to build out that deliverable. The other one is SB 261. So SB 261, TCFD, you saw that probably earlier as well. And on this slide, we kind of have a summary. So TCFD stands for Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And if you remember in Christian's slide from the EU side, it was not a mandatory reporting framework. It was a reporting framework which can be used, but it's not a mandatory one for EU. So there would be like a difference. So you would have to have at least 2 reportings now, with the California one under TCFD if your company has more than $500 million in revenue globally, and then whatever the requirement is in the EU, which long term, I'm also involved in a couple of global organizations from a standard setting standpoint, and that there's a real push to get to a aligned standard, so you don't have to deal with different frameworks and different reportings to make it a little bit easier. But right now we are not there yet. For TCFD framework, we basically have 4 core pillars, like governance strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. And you have 11 disclosure requirements. Not going to go through all of them, but on the governance side, typically, the board needs to be involved. How do you think about and conduct the oversight of climate-related risks? The management, how do you assess it? What's your strategy to deal with the impact of climate-related risk for your organization? Financial planning. From risk management side, really, how do you process and identify risks around your climate-related risk for your organization? How do you manage it on the risk side? And then lastly, how do you measure it? For example, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, if that's an appropriate framework. So the next slide, just to give you a little bit of overview from a timing perspective. So we talked about TCFD, so $500 million global revenue. So the reporting requirements really starts with 1/126. However, you need 1/125 as a baseline. So we recommend our clients are looking into that now, and if there's a compliance requirement, that we have enough time to build out the reporting, or assist the client to build out the reporting, which normally takes between 6 to 9 months, sometimes longer, depending on how complex manufacturing process is and how difficult it is to get the information in the organization in the future. But what we wanted to show here is basically that it sounds like it's far away with 2026, but it really comes quickly, and to avoid a crunch in 2025 or late 2024, we would maybe consider the summer months, or depending on when your business is a little bit slower, to kind of do a deep dive, and we're happy to help with that. Changing gears here a little bit with the SEC. So we just wanted to provide a quick overview here. So knowing that you might not be directly impacted, but to make sure you have a good sense of what some of your customers might be dealing with. So in a nutshell, it impacts all companies listed and on the SEC or having some capital market activities in regulated markets in the U.S. and it's a financial disclosure, so it's going to be done in financial statements. So you got to apply GAAP, US GAAP, or IFRS, and the IASB, which is the standard setup for the IFRS, has came out with like 2 standards. So if you're a foreign private issuer, so you're like a German company who's listed in the US, and you file your financial statements under using IFRS, which you can do as a foreign private issuer. There's a couple of regulations to consider in that regard. However, if you do IFRS, then you have to comply with the full set of IFRS, and that you have to look into these new standards the IASB issued around the IFRS, which is IFRS S1 and S2. There's also an audit requirement, so if it's part of your financial statement, it needs to be audited. So there's some kind of it needs to be you have to have an audit trail. We help clients kind of build out audit readiness solutions where we kind of pressure test how the reporting is flowing through the organization. So if it's auditable by a third party. And maybe hopping on the next slide, because we only like 4 minutes left, I think. And I want to see if we have at least get in a couple Q&A, just a timeline. So what you guys could take from there is basically the 2025, 2026 timeline. So LAF stands for Large Accelerated Filer, AF for Accelerated Filer, just different timelines when they have to file their financial statements under SEC regulation. And as you can see, they basically have to file, large accelerated filers have to file with a fiscal year beginning at 2025. So it is right around the corner, and accelerated filer are getting a little bit more time. And then, the next bucket, like it's emerging growth companies. So like, smaller companies who just going public, they have a little bit more time, but it's really right around the corner. Slide 23, just a quick summary with the US perspective. So in the US, what you have the SEC, if it's applicable, or if it's applicable to your customers, you basically get it through the back door, because they're gonna use some of your information to be able to report. You have CSRD requirements. If you're a US company and you have activities in Europe, you got to comply with that. There are IFRS sustainability standards. So if you use IFRS, you got to comply with that mandate. And then the climate legislation in California, which we see is the most unknown for a lot of our Mittelstand clients in the US, because it's so new. I think that's tax credit incentives, shouldn't forget that. So that's kind of important to think about. Okay, there's a variety of tax credit incentives out there. Some of them are actually expiring by the end of May this year. So if you want to look into this or need some help with that, give us a call or send me a note. We can see if you qualify for anything before it expires. But in general, when we advise our clients, we map the net zero strategy with the tax credit incentive. So you have like an integrated offering, integrated solution for your efforts. And it's not only you have to be compliant, but with your activities, you can also qualify for these tax credits. That I think we have like maybe time for 1 or 2 questions, and then sorry that we couldn't really get to all of them, but please feel free to reach out, and all the questions we received we couldn't answer, we want to follow up with an email. But Gabriela, if you want to ask one quick question to maybe Christian.
Sure.
And then,
thank you, Joe. Yes, we have a question. The clarification on California's requirements. Do the revenue test apply to the company selling into California or its parent? For example, if a company itself is only 100 million and deals with California, but its foreign parent is 2 billion, will it be subject to the regulations?
Yeah, the regulation is really focused on the global revenue. So if I understand it correctly, the group revenue is 1 billion in that example, and the US, the revenue of the US subsidiary is 100 million. As long as some business activity is done in California, there would be a reporting requirement.
Correct. So that concludes our presentation, and we do want to welcome additional questions that you may have. You have our email addresses. The presentation has been recorded and it will be available on our website. And the participants will also receive a copy of the slides. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Gabriela.
Thanks, Christian.